Welcome to Sproutcast, where we speak with changemakers, social innovators, and entrepreneurs about how to make the world a better place. And now, here's your host, Julia Duffy.
Welcome back to Sproutcast. My name is Julia Duffy, and today we're speaking with Steph Lorenzo, founder and CEO of Project Futures, a not-for-profit organisation whose objective is to stop global human trafficking and slavery and to empower individuals to take action in their own communities. Welcome to Sproutcast, Steph.
Thank you, Julia. Great to be here.
Wonderful. I thought I'd start by asking today, Steph, how your relationship with the NFP space arose. Was it something that you've always been interested in or involved with? How did this relationship originate?
Actually, it's interesting. My background isn't in the not-for-profit world. I didn't study sort of international aid and development or anything like that. My trajectory was actually I wanted to pursue a career in marketing and comms and PR. I never as a young person ever thought that I would be working in the not-for-profit space, if I'm going to be completely honest with you. But after reading a story about a woman who was sold into prostitution at such a young age, I was quite compelled to do more. And that sort of started the relationship, I guess, and obviously started me wanting to do something. And Project Futures was that outlet to do something for a great cause and in the not-for-profit space. And then my world dramatically changed from a marketing, public relations, comms, climbing the corporate ladder in that way to, working in the not-for-profit sector.
So I'm kind of interested perhaps in how it went from you being interested in this particular issue to wanting to become involved in a more formal sense with an organisation, or in your case, I guess, starting your own organisation.
Yeah, well, I am an avid book reader, a book lover, if you like. Reading a book like Somali Moms when I was 21, definitely something in me, just a spark kind of, came to life. I'm not sure what it was. I really enjoyed the read. I literally read it from cover to cover in a night, and I'd never read a book like that before. And I think my reaction to it was, the issue of human trafficking and slavery, and particularly her story with sex trafficking and trafficking of young children for the sex trade, I was really overwhelmed by it. It was nothing that I'd ever thought about before. And my response was, well, what can I do as an individual? Where are my best skills and talents? And for me, my best skills and talents were around creating an event, garnering networks to fundraise for services that already were existing on the ground. And I wanted to have fun while doing it. Like Project Futures, our ethos is all about having fun. It's everyday social interactions for good. And so I was, 21, 22 at the time, organising parties and big events for a cause outside of my normal everyday full-time job was a great way that I was having fun. I would probably do it for, as an extracurricular activity anyway, so why not do it for a cause? And that was my answer to it, I guess. I wanted to have fun and do something for good, and Project Futures was my outlet to be able to do that.
At what stage did you realise that the best way to funnel your idea for fundraising and for holding events and growing awareness, that could form an organisation on its own, and that you weren't just perhaps contributing to other organisations, but that you were going to make a real organisation out of it separately yourself?
Well, it was interesting. When I back to the very beginning, I read the book and I wanted to do something. My reaction to it was, I'm going to organise an event. That first event, which was not under Project Futures, because the organisation didn't exist back then, it was come and join Steph Lorenzo on a cycle challenge through Cambodia. It was a 500k cycle challenge, and I wanted to get interested people. I thought majority of them were going to be my friends that joined me. We had to fundraise for the organisation on the ground in Cambodia, and we would do this amazing, holiday through Cambodia, cycling around, seeing this beautiful country. It was kind of holidaying for a purpose. After a year of organising and planning that, we had 21 people that collectively raised $80,000. Now, this was just individuals raising money for an international organisation in Cambodia that was run by a Somali mum at the time. And Project Futures hadn't existed. But when I came back from that experience, we did the cycle through Cambodia. We saw the projects on the ground where our money was going towards. I couldn't come back to Australia and just go on with my normal marketing comms full-time life. I mean, I did do that. I was working full-time in marketing and comms still, but I thought I would start Project Futures straight away as my outlet to raise funds and collect funds to be able to support those services on the ground. So we're a bit different to the normal charity, I think. We partner with these service providers that provide direct and holistic support for victims of human trafficking and slavery, but we're kind of their fundraising, marketing, corporate social responsibility, individual fundraiser portal. And we're very particular with who we partner with, and we're very particular to partner with them on a long-term basis, because a lot of these services, you're not going to get results overnight. You need to really work through some of the endemic and systemic issues around human trafficking and slavery and why this occurs in countries like Cambodia. But in 2011, we partnered with Australian-based service providers as well. And again, these issues are happening here in our own backyard, which is just crazy to think about. And they are long-term and systemic changes that need to be made. So we want to work with them on that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It sounds like that's, I guess, an unusual business model that you have as a charity, really. That's perhaps something other people might not have considered.
Well, it's interesting. A lot of people back then, so this was in 2009, I had no concept of what a social enterprise was. I mean, I didn't really know. I mean, in Australia, it wasn't really a big sort of thriving, or it wasn't an industry that I knew about. I just knew about the not-for-profit charity world or the corporate world, for-profit corporate world. For me, because I wasn't running a service, and in the charity world, I see charities, or back then I saw charities as people that provide a service to vulnerable communities or disadvantaged communities, or provide some sort of education and schooling. We were a fundraiser, and we've always been a fundraiser, but what we realised at that time, particularly because we were being led by 20-year-olds who were working in the PwCs and the CBAs and the Westpacs of the world, a lot of my friends were in those sort of industries, but they wanted to use their business acumen and their skills and talents for a good cause. They didn't want to necessarily quit their jobs, but they wanted and they had this passion and this eagerness and this business savvy to be able to support these services in different ways. And, 5 years on, we're seeing government support for charities that kind of, I wouldn't say going down, but definitely decreasing. You're seeing aid budgets being slashed. You're seeing after the GFC, a lot of corporations, cutting their corporate social responsibility or not sort of focusing as much on that area. And this is where I think charities have a really big responsibility and a big opportunity to really grasp onto this sort of these individuals that really want to do something for a cause, but they have really great business skills and so forth and resources at their disposal in some of these companies to do that. And I found back then there weren't many charities that were good at that. The charities were really good at providing the service. They weren't necessarily great in communicating their message. The big ones were. They are massive businesses, I guess you could say, and they're doing great things. But the smaller based organisations where we wanted to really drive change and see tangible results from young people, a lot of these charities couldn't do that or didn't have the knowledge to do that. So my skills in marketing and comms, I wanted to utilise that to my best advantage for these causes.
I was thinking still about the type of business model or structure perhaps that your organisation has taken, and that you said there weren't many organisations like that around the time that you got started. Who then did you take advice from in this area? Who perhaps inspired you? What other organisations or people?
We definitely looked. I remember Googling young youth charities or youth-led charities. Two popped up. One, you might have heard of them, is Oaktree. They're quite a big and particularly focused on young people charity. You have to be 26 and under, I think, to be part of their leadership team, and it's quite a big voluntary network. And the only other one that I found was an organisation called YGAP in Melbourne, who is fantastic, and we've seen them grow alongside us as well. And, you know, the founder or the co-founders of YGAP and I are great friends, and we've seen some really great successes throughout the last 5 years. But they were the only two I found. Yes, there were youth programs, and I put that in inverted commas, with big charities, but they weren't being run by young people. They weren't being understood. There wasn't sort of an understanding. And again, this is back in 2009. I think there's a lot more nowadays, 5.5 years later. But I found that, you know, a lot of the youth programs weren't being youth-led. They weren't catering to young people. They were more sort of a tick box, or that they were something that, you know, traditional charities or bigger charities felt like they had to do. But when you think about it, many of the traditional and bigger charities in the space at that time, why would they focus on young people when there was so much flack about Gen Ys in the media? That was one of the big reasons why I wanted to do this as well. You know, young people don't have the giving capacity that, you know, many charities might think older philanthropists or people like CEOs or, you know, very rich Bill Gates type Warren Buffetts of the world might have. So Gen Ys just didn't have that kind of giving power. But what they sort of missed, I guess, or what I guess the opportunity that Project Futures and our team saw was the fact that en masse, Project Futures, the audience of Project Futures and the young people of Project Futures en masse can actually give as much as one philanthropist might give or one check might give. And we are engaging young people. So it wasn't just write a check, tick a box from a company, see you later. It was like, we are going to engage this generation. We are going to showcase some social justice issues. And we want these people to grow with that as they grow, because these guys will be the leaders of tomorrow. And wouldn't it be great to see CEOs of big banks 50 years later turn their bank into a bit more of a social enterprise or focus on CSR when they become the leaders of these organisations in future?
That point you mentioned about engagement with, I guess, your stakeholders or the people that you want to have invested in your organisation, investing in the cause.
Yeah.
Could you maybe explain a little bit about how your organisation goes about creating this kind of engagement? Because I think it's something that some other organisations struggle with, perhaps.
Yes.
And it sounds like it sets you apart, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, within Project Futures as a I guess, business model, charity model, whatever you want to call it, we have 5 revenue streams. So the first one is corporate partnerships. The second one is official Project Futures fundraising events and campaigns. The third one is what we call DIY fundraising. The fourth one is online donations. And the fifth one is speaking engagements. So let's go to the first two, because they're the really key way. Well, the first 3, I think, are the really key way that we engage both companies but also individuals to really become part and ambassador for our cause. So the first one being corporate partnerships. We realised, I guess I realised a bit early on, that many companies claimed that they do a lot of great CSR activities. However, when you dig deeper, the CSR activities of many companies, not all, but many companies are ad hoc. They're run by volunteers who have actual job descriptions in usually HR or marketing. So you find that the CSR component sort of falls short because they have all of their other things to do to bring in funding or money or whatever for that business or generate revenue, depending on their role. It is sometimes usually just a tick box exercise around sort of short-term brand engagement. Yep, we're going to throw money at this because it's the flavour of the month at the time or whatever it is. And there's no sort of long-term strategy for CSR within businesses. And I think this is a real opportunity. And that's something that I saw consistently when I went to visit businesses. And I used to get into those businesses through the employees. So I'd get my friends who worked at, you know, the top 10 banks or the top 10 accounting firms or the top 10 law firms. And I would say, can you introduce me to someone who deals with CSR? And the first thing that they say to me is, oh, I don't know who that is, or is there even a role in that? And they would have to dig deeper to find that. The second issue that I found was when I asked, well, what are the top 3 charities that your business actually supports? A lot of employees didn't know, but they wanted to. They didn't know how their company actually engaged with outside philanthropy or outside social impact and social services. So there was a lack of communication internally with that company. And I think one way that we've tried, obviously we're not experts at it, but one way that I definitely have seen that we've succeeded is we actually are trying to speak to a corporate on a holistic and long-term level, it's about understanding what their strategy is and being really honest and open about it. And if they don't have one, do they want to start? And do they want to start with, one charity that they can really focus on and see long-term impact and sustainability and progress on? Or do they want to chop and change and have mixed messages? And obviously the company would, you're not going to change your vision every day. You're not changing your accountants every day. You don't change your lawyers in a business every day. So why would you change your charities as well? Because you miss seeing that long-term impact, that many issues that are long-term issues, you kind of miss seeing them if you're only supporting them on a 6-month or annual basis. And we engage employees. That's the big way that we do it. If we can get in there and do lunch and learns, if we can offer great activities for employees to get involved with, if we can showcase that it's actually easy to give back and have fun while doing it through our different programs, then they can do that. So that's kind of on a corporate partnership level. We try and partner with companies long term. Another way is obviously it's called DIY fundraising. We want people to be ambassadors for us wherever they are in the world, and particularly obviously in Australia because that's where we are. We have a toolkit you can download online, and it doesn't matter if you're you're in Sydney or you're in Perth or you're in Alice Springs or Rockhampton, you can do an event for us and be an ambassador for us, and we've got all the tools for you to be able to do that. We trust you with our brand. Most brands don't trust other people with their brands. They've got a stronghold on what they can and can't do, and usually have to go through processes and red tape and all sorts of things. We are actually the opposite. We created the toolkit, which is a real easy step-by-step where people can take that and go with it, and they can be our ambassador wherever they are, and we're giving them the right information about the issue of trafficking and slavery in order to do that in their own community if they're passionate about it. There's actually a big black tie ball event happening in Rockhampton next Saturday, and that was organised by a volunteer up there. She's got 250 people, all proceeds to us. That's probably looking to raise around $15,000, and we haven't done anything. She's downloaded the toolkit, she's followed the steps, and she's done it on her own. And I think that is so phenomenal because there's no way that Project Futures could do an official fundraising event in Rockhampton just because we don't have the resources to do that, and we're based here in Sydney. So that's, again, one of the other ways. And obviously our official fundraising events and campaigns is a great way to engage just the wider community. Whoever you are, if we're in that location, hopefully Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra, we've had different events in. We've had some in Brisbane, some in Perth, where we can. You can obviously come along, meet like-minded people who want to do something and hopefully get inspired to act on your own as well.
I'm just going to switch gears for a second now and talk perhaps a little bit about your leadership of your organisation and what that experience has been like, moving, I guess you mentioned, from a more marketing communications background to being a leader of your organisation, being a CEO. What was that experience like, and perhaps what challenges have you faced?
It's definitely been a challenge, but it's been a really exciting one. I always think of the glass half full. So even if we're having a bad day or something like that, I'll always, look at the glass half full and look at the successes and stuff that we've done. I guess the hardest thing, I wouldn't say the hardest, it was kind of one of the best things and also one of the most challenging things was taking on staff, paid staff. We took on our second employee full-time, started in sort of January last year. And the issues around staffing are always really tough. And I was always used to working with volunteers or working myself and sort of being able to manage different volunteers, but you're kind of managing your expectations with that. But when you start to get paid staff on board, the game changes because you're obviously utilising funds to be able to pay that staff, and you want to see the progress, you want to see the revenue generation, you want to see, what that person's bringing in. And that's tough because it takes guidance and coaching. And I'd always worked in teams, but I'd not necessarily managed them before, to be honest. So this is the first time I was really managing a staff member. And it's been amazing. It's been definitely challenging on my end because she's a fantastic employee. However, I think when you're so used to doing everything on your own and you're used to doing it at a really fast pace, and you just have to learn to, you have to learn that not everyone's going to do everything your way. and your way is never always the best way. There's other ways when you start getting employees involved. They're thinking of new ideas. They want to grow it as well in a better way, and you've got to take that into consideration. I definitely think, for me personally, that's been one of the biggest challenges, kind of trying to manage staff and that expectation. But it's a great sign for the business that we're growing and taking on more people. I also think it was a challenge in that when you start to pay staff, particularly in a charity or a social enterprise of that matter, you're very scrutinised on your financials. And so you should be, where we completely believe in transparency and due diligence. And, you go on our website and you can download all of our annual reports ever since I came on board in a full-time paid capacity. And it is pressure, though. It's way more pressure when you take on staff, because if they don't perform, it looks like you're paying staff to kind of raise awareness, great, but what's that bringing to actually the projects that you're meant to be funding and supporting? Now, I've definitely had a lot of challenges around that. I used to be of the sort of notion that, any charity that spends more than 10% on their overheads, are not doing a great job. Now, having worked in a charity world, and I came at that from a very naive place, but having worked so hard in the charity world for so much time as a volunteer, you get bang for your back when you pay people. And sometimes you need to take risks. You need to be innovative. And that sometimes does take up time, money, and resources. But it definitely pays off in the end if you have the right strategy, if you have the right vision, and ultimately if you know what you're aiming towards. I definitely think, for me, that was a really big change from going as a volunteer. We were marketing ourselves, which we were, as 100% voluntary. So why wouldn't you join us? We're a bunch of young people doing great stuff as volunteers. So 100% of your donation is actually going to the project, because we're not paying staff. Then when you start to pay staff, you can't use that line anymore, because obviously your costs are going up, but your revenue goes up a lot because obviously the time and so forth. And I'll give you an example of that. When I was working 3 days a week for Project Futures versus the year that I jumped to a full-time paid position, we doubled our revenue in a year. And that's really amazing from a financial, point of view, and from the fact that, it was happening at a time where there were so many charities popping up, and, human trafficking as an issue wasn't even on the agenda. So for us, it was a big win and a worthwhile investment, to take on a staff member.
Perhaps another interesting aspect of leadership, which you mentioned just now, was the responsibilities for transparency that you have, and other kind of legal obligations, particularly as a charity. Would you be able to talk perhaps about the first time you kind of started to deal with these sides of running your organisation, and how, with the key responsibility being towards you and your board, how you tackled these for the first time?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've had a great board since the beginning. We have always had, when I first started Project Futures, I remember, contacting the ATO and ASIC and kind of going, okay, so what's my next step? And they were like, well, you need a board, which is sort of like a responsible persons that can, take risk, can sort of take on the risk of Project Futures, and obviously can give you advice. And we got an investment banker, a marketing guru, a head of an accounting firm, and a lawyer, obviously, because you need to diversify sort of the skills. And in any business or charity, you need a finance person, you need a legal person, and sort of the investment banker and marketing were based on networks, and also the fact that we were in that marketing comm space. So from the beginning, we've had really great advice. We've been able to draw that out. I think we've always been, and I personally, as the leader of Project Futures, has always been very particular about transparency. I wanted people to know what I was doing 100% of the time, which is why we were so adamant to have our financial records or, annual reports online every year. We've gotten audited every year since the beginning, or since we've obviously taken on staff and had to open our own bank accounts and so forth. So we're transparent on that. If anyone asks us for our financial record, we can give it to them. And I think that's one thing, if you do support an organisation, big or small, those things are actually things that you should be entitled to as a donor. And if they don't have them, then, you know, there might be reasons, but I would sort of question that. You can download all of our reports online and you can see who does our audited accounts and so forth. So, I mean, transparency is a big one for any charity and organisation. I think when it comes to other things like tax deductibility and different things with the ATO and government and just being up to date with them, I'm not a legal brain. I'm definitely more of a numbers person than I was previously, but I have to be as the CEO. I think you just have to be up to date with the not-for-profit sector. It changes all the time and laws come in and out depending on government as well, who's in government. You just have to be on the pulse. And that means networking with other NGO groups, being up to date with, different networks and in the legal realm, in the pro bono world realm. And I'm a big believer in networking. And so I'll try and be out there as much as possible. One, to get project features out there to different audiences, but two, for myself to be kept up to date with the latest and greatest of what's happening in that charity sector. So you can be accountable for what you're doing as an organisation.
So you mentioned there that fairly early on you asked the ATO about your obligations in setting up a board and how you found people to, or perhaps the type of people you were looking for to join your board. Could you tell me a little bit more about how you work with your board? What's that relationship like?
Yeah, well, we've had a really interesting time. We had technically 6 board members when we first began, and that included me, so 5 external members. We now have 8. We went through a really amazing board review process last July, which was actually incredible when we felt like our organisation was sort of going to go into the next level and we felt like we needed more support. We felt like we'd grown so much from the first time we got our first set of board members, but we were really happy that 3 of them decided to stay on, and the only reason why 2 resigned voluntarily was because they were moving interstate or overseas. So how I work with my board, we have set meetings. It's usually 1.5 months. It's about every 2 months, so it's about 6 times a year. But I also call on them individually for advice depending on their background. The board is there to definitely take on the risk of the organisation. So they have to be responsible for corporate governance. They have to be responsible for the direction and the strategy. And I guess for me as CEO, I have to operationalise what our strategy actually is. And the board meetings, I think, since we've revamped our board and taken on more members, so we have 8 currently on our board of directors, which was a hard and long process, but it was a great value for me to be able to go through that, particularly when you're dealing with executive level people. I also wanted more young people on my board because we were an organisation that represented and thrived on young professionals, and I wanted to give young people an opportunity. I don't want people to think that a board of directors has to be sort of grey-haired men or women, that have now left and retired and are really wealthy or something like that. Boards have to be driven by passion for the cause, the skill set that you've got, and it has to also be an opportunity for young people to learn. And I was really passionate about that. So our board is, divvied between, we call them the grey hairs, but then also young professionals, which has been great. So there's a lot to learn on both sides. So, we meet every 2 months, but individually I'll contact them when I need support and advice on certain matters within Project Futures. And they're always willing and supportive to talk through different matters.
You mentioned that board membership is perhaps something that's less common for younger people or not seen as something that younger people are likely to be involved in. What would you recommend to someone who was thinking of starting their own organisation, wanted to better understand the role of the board and perhaps what they would do to find out more about that?
Yeah, Well, I definitely think the first thing, and I know this might sound really hypocritical of me, is think really hard of whether you want to actually start an organisation. Look for organisations that maybe are already out there that you can help to make better. That's number one. I know that's really hypocritical of me to say because I started my own organisation, but I think where Project Futures is a bit different is where funding a need, which is funding for services and not-for-profit services. You have to think really hard because the board is definitely, I think, it's not easy. I mean, they are people who have had, really great. They're people that definitely carry the risk on the governance level and so forth, and they'll challenge you. That's what they're meant to do. They're meant to challenge you with your strategy and your processes and all of your thoughts. And yeah, it's definitely. It can be a struggle in a good way because they've always got the best intentions at heart, but they might not see something the way that you do. And you kind of, they're a bit of the brake pad, I have to say, for someone that has a real vision and has a real passion and a want to make a change. But that can be a good thing. They're kind of devil's advocates, if you like. Or some people on the board play that role and some people play the, yes, let's get their role. But those personalities is what makes it really interesting and makes you really think things through before actually doing them, whether it's a campaign or a new event or the direction of the organisation. My advice would be choose carefully. Choose carefully and don't necessarily choose friends. I had one friend, I would call him a really good friend on the board when I first started Project Futures, but the rest were actually sort of parents, not parents' friends' parents who I'd not even met before, but knew that they ran their own accounting firm, knew that they worked in a legal firm. One was my ex-boss, and she was like the boss twice up from me. She was the director of the marketing and comms team at Australian Catholic University. And I met with her and had a great chat with her, and there was just some sort of synergy there that I felt like I'm going to ask her this, and I think she's going to think I'm crazy because I don't even know her very well. But it's actually good to have people that can really give you sound advice. So they're not necessarily just your friends that want to see you succeed. And, they have to be credible in their own industry as well. I mean, we showcase our board on our website and on all of our collateral for a reason, and that is people see that the managing director of Konica Minolta Business Solutions is on our board, or a senior financial executive from CBA is on our board, and immediately they'll feel comfortable or more comfortable that governance and that risk is on these types of people with reputations in the field. So I think you've got to definitely choose your board wisely. Make sure there's someone that understands your vision but is willing to also not just agree with you all the time. It can be frustrating, but it's a really good thing when you can have those robust conversations. And, I guess try and get a board that thinks a little bit differently or is not afraid in the not-for-profit world anyway to take a little bit of risk, because it is on their watch at the end of the day. It is a risk for them, but I don't think problems of the 21st century will change without innovation and creativity in the not-for-profit world.
Wonderful. Yeah, innovation is an interesting subject, really, about I think many non-profit organisations are doing a fantastic job of being more innovative, but it often seems to be some of the smaller ones, like your own organisation. Is that something you've experienced as well?
Absolutely. It's really hard in some of the bigger organisations to get cut through purely because I think sometimes there's a lot of red tape involved. There's a lot of personalities involved. With a small and nimble and flexible organisation like ours that are led by people that, again, are thinking differently. It's almost a different generation. It is a different generation. I think that there are a lot of, wins out there to have, particularly around innovation. The innovation sector in Sydney, just even in the last 3 years that I've seen and been a part of, this whole idea of social enterprise, this idea and concept of shared value, looking to be corporate social responsibility citizens, the rise of intrapreneurs as opposed to entrepreneurs. I think that all of this stuff is being led and executed and forwarded by the next generation. I think it's my generation. It's this sort of, I don't think there's an age necessarily to it, but it's people that definitely understand that concept of wanting to shake up the corporate world, shake up the not-for-profit world, bring them together, create real meaning in what you're trying to achieve, not sort of, play it at egos necessarily, which sometimes can happen with boards. I've got to be honest. I mean, I think that sometimes the biggest challenge that anyone that, has to report to a board can be egos of that board. I know I've talked about it with members of my board. I know our board has even brought it up with each other. And I think that we can do that because we are such a new and exciting and innovative organisation, and the board members have seen that vision. And as I said, they're from all different generations, which is a really great thing.
You mentioned just now entrepreneurs and their, relationship with innovation. And I wondered if that related to something you mentioned earlier about perhaps not necessarily recommending that people start their own organisation. Is this something you think there should be more of in the not-for-profit space?
Yeah, definitely. I love the idea of an entrepreneur. When I first heard that term, and I think it's probably about 2 years ago now, I use it everywhere. And I love it because we actually are cultivating entrepreneurs within Project Futures. Yes, we meet with a lot of innovative people that have started their own thing, business, social enterprise, not-for-profit, whatever it is. But I think what drives Project Futures, or the revenue raisers of Project Futures, has definitely been entrepreneurs, people that have gotten their workplace involved, people have gotten their school involved, people have gotten their workplace or church involved or community group involved. We wouldn't be here without those people. They're not necessarily wanting to start something, but I guess they like the fact that they're part of a wider community that are focused on an issue and a cause. And for us, the Project Futures people, that's ending human trafficking and slavery. And so I think entrepreneurs are gold, and more businesses, I would hope, will support entrepreneurs who bring in really great ideas for the business to do different things, to do innovative things with the not-for-profit space. And there are some amazing ones happening out there, but hopefully there'll be more of a push for entrepreneurs to sort of come out of their shell and, and really push through the boundaries of bureaucracy and red tape and make things happen, because it can happen. I've seen it happen time and time again, and it's really inspiring.
Did you have any advice perhaps for someone who is in this situation? Perhaps they're working already in a corporate or in a non-profit organisation but would like to contribute more?
Yeah, I think find out what you're passionate about, obviously. Find an organisation that you relate to and that you feel you identify with, and work with them on how to best support their current strategy. Because one thing that I find that can be really frustrating for a lot of people in the not-for-profit world around volunteering is volunteers want to do what they want to do. They don't want to do what's in line with the organisation's strategy. And sometimes that's why many people, many charities decide not to take on as many volunteers as they might have used to take on, because it takes up a lot of time and a lot of space for not a lot of return. So I would say work with that organisation wholeheartedly to really understand what their strategy is and what their vision and goals are, and look at how your skills might work in line with that. And then ask forgiveness, not permission. Just do it. Do something, whether it's start up a morning tea at your workplace, whether it's, try to figure out within the ranks of your business who and where, who runs the corporate social responsibility. Do we have a corporate social responsibility? Do we have a planned giving model? Ask questions. Just don't be afraid to do that, because you'll never know the answers you can get. And also, I think that you'll become, I believe, a really well-respected person in your industry who's not sort of backing down, who wants to work within the system to do something really innovative and fun and good for whatever cause it is that you're passionate about. And if you're interested in human trafficking and slavery, contact Project Futures, because we've kind of done the hard work for you, and we want businesses to see that employees have to voice it if they want it. Employees want to work to purpose, not just for profit. So a company, I think, that values that and values their employees will see the benefit in that in the long term.
You mentioned just then some of the challenges, I guess, of working with volunteers, that you were looking at it from the volunteers' perspective then, but I was wondering if you could offer some insight on what it's like from the organisation's perspective, perhaps someone else in your position, how they manage the expectations of volunteers.
Absolutely. Look, I think everyone that wants to volunteer for a charity or a cause, definitely it comes from a good place. I'm not for 1 minute denying that. It definitely comes from the best place. They want to support, they want to help, they want to do something. I would say to people that are interested to volunteer or to do something, don't ask what you can do. Find a solution based on the information on the website of a charity, based on what they currently are doing, and find a solution and then bring that solution to the charity. So, for example, practical example, we have on our website an array of upcoming events. We have an area where if you're a workplace, we would, want to get in touch with you to try and see how we can further engage your workplace. We have a array of different campaigns where it actually states like how you can get involved. And I think if someone comes to me and says, well, how can I get involved? And I say, well, go on our events page, come to an event. Or I give them direct actions, and it's almost like some of them, not all of them, of course, but a lot of them kind of are like, I don't know if I want to do that. So if you don't want to do that, find what you want to do. Bring a solution to the charity. Don't just come to them expecting an answer, because the answers are actually there, but it takes up time, effort and resources of someone to answer a question from a volunteer that, and I'm sorry to say, but sometimes 80% of the time the volunteer doesn't do anyway. And that's a shame. And I think I talk from a point of view of a smaller organisation. I think volunteers are the lifeblood of a lot of organisations where they rebuild houses and they paint things and, they do all sorts of activities. I guess because we're such a small organisation in terms of resources, we can't spend majority of our resources telling volunteers what to do. So that's why we've created a website that's interactive, that shows you what you can do. And so come up with a solution. Don't ask the question of what can I do. Come up with a solution based on whoever the charity is that you support, and go for it. Ask forgiveness, not permission. Download our DIY kit and do an event. You don't need our permission to do it. And most of the time, you don't need a charity's permission to fundraise or to do anything like that. If they're a legitimate charity and you're wanting to support them, just like I did that very first bike ride, I didn't ask that charity if I could fundraise for them. I fundraised and then said, hey, we've got $80,000 that we want to give to you. How does that sound? And what do you think they said? They were stoked. So I'm not saying you have to do it that way, but I definitely think more people should ask forgiveness, not permission, and give it a go.
I just wanted to switch gears again one more time and ask you about your position on, or your thoughts perhaps on, sustainability for your organisation and what kind of future strategies you have in place. How do you think about that in your organisation?
Yeah, I think we think about sustainability a lot, and particularly even succession planning around, what happens if I decide, all of a sudden I want to go into the corporate world or something like that, which is possible. What happens if a really big crisis comes into my personal life and I'm the only one with one staff? Creating it, succession and sustainability is such a big area or issue for any growing not-for-profit organisation, and we don't take it lightly. We've worked on a strategy with our board of directors' guidance on the future. We've diversified our revenue streams, which is a way that any business or charity needs to look at their, revenue, of how they're sustaining themselves and how they're where they're bringing in the most funding and where the trends are, and what you need to do to focus on that. I think, though, because we're still small, we're not massive by any means. We're not like sort of competing with the World Visions of the world. But I think for any growing organisation, we just need to continue to focus on our vision, be very focused on what we do, and work really well with our partners in order to, I guess, at least get that foothold. I mean, we only diversified our revenue streams, it was about a year and a half ago when we brought in our new strategy. And so we're already 2 years in of that 3-year strategy. And we've decided as an organisation, it's a really interesting time with Project Futures. We've decided as an organisation that we are going to be creating a new 5-year plan that will start from January 1st, 2016. So we are planning for that because we've looked at, how we're going and what the trends are and where the funds are being raised the most and where the need is in terms of the anti-trafficking world. And times are changing, times are changing more than ever before. So you have to be, again, on the pulse with all of that. And your strategy needs to reflect that if you want to succeed. So we've identified that. We're sort of, I guess you could say, scrapping the 3rd year of the 3-year budget that we presented to our board back in April 2013, because we've seen that change is happening and we want to be ahead of that as opposed to, running after it. I
think perhaps this is probably a good place to leave our interview. It was wonderful to speak with you today, Steph. You've offered us some really interesting insights, which I think our audience will find invaluable. So thank you again for speaking with us on Sproutcast today, Steph.
Thank you, Julie.
Did you enjoy this episode of Sproutcast? Visit sproutcast.net to sign up for our newsletter. The newsletter includes copies of the show notes and additional content from each episode.